As the tension between the United States and Russia heats up, I'm reminded of Yogi Berra's line, "It's like deja vu all over again." To those who grew up in the 1950s, 1960s, the current standoff seems like a replay of the past with a couple of differences. Nuclear weapons were new back then, and most of us were absolutely scared to death of nuclear war. The Soviet Union was the enemy, and the bombs delivered by Soviet long-range bombers was the threat. This period was referred to as the Cold War. Today we are privileged to be visiting with two veterans of the Cold War who will share their experience with us, experience and stories about the Cold War in Connecticut when we were the front line. I'm George Ripley, chair of the Connecticut Militia Heritage Council, and I'm pleased to introduce you to Bob Miller and Ed Keeney, who were part of the Nike missile defense operation in Connecticut from its early days in 1960 through the end in 1971. Initially, Connecticut had 12 Nike missile sites, and at various times, Bob and Ed worked at 3 of them. As the title to our program suggests, the Cold War in Connecticut was literally in our backyards. Welcome, Ed and Bob. And then let's start with some general questions to provide perspective, and then move to specific questions about your duties and individual experiences. And of course, feel free to add personal stories and memories at any time.
Whenever you're ready, George.
Bob, perhaps you could describe what it was like in Connecticut during the Cold War and why you became a part of the Nike missile program.
Well, what it was like, if you remember, anybody who went to school in the 50s, they were taught how to get underneath the desk in case of a nuclear weapon. How I got in, I was part of the AAA battalion over in West Hartford, and we had one outfit in the back of the armory and one in the front. And around I would say 59, the Connecticut National Guard was going to take over the missile sites, the Nike Ajax sites, and we had our opportunity to take jobs. Where I was in the battalion, the battery I was in, we were going to take over Portland, and the battery up in front was going to take over Simsbury. So that's how I first got involved.
Very good, thank you. And you said the AAA battalion. What did the AAA stand for?
You have to say that one more time.
What did AAA stand for?
They were anti-aircraft, 90 millimeters.
Ah, okay.
And we used to go up to Wellfleet for AT.
So that was the natural source for people to come and man the Nikes then, the artillery unit.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was kind of outdated.
So you were assigned to Portland at the beginning.
Of the Nike era, yes.
Yeah. And so what was your job there? What did you do?
I started as an ordnance parts specialist. And what I did is, in the launching area where the missiles were, I was in control of all parts, logbooks, and things like that. Whereas Ed, who you'll meet later, was the ordnance parts specialist in the fire control area where the radars are. And
ballpark, how many people were there at the site on a regular basis?
Probably around 110, 120.
And that was
more so when we hit Nike Hercules.
And that was typical for the Nike missile sites in Connecticut at that point?
Yep.
Did the sites operate 24/7?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. More. Now, when we say that, we had what we called hot battery, whereas 1 week you were on 24 one day and you had the next day off. That was for a week. Other than that, yes, we were on call at all times, but we were not physically on the base. This is Nike Ajax I'm speaking now. Right. There was always a guard on post.
Let me ask you, Bob, what was the general layout of the sites?
Well, in the launching area, you normally had a post 2, and then you came in the barracks were the first building that you would see. BOQ was attached to the barracks. Your launch and control trailer would have been the next. This is on Portland now, because it varies a little bit, different sites. And then be the assembly building where you worked on the missiles, you tested them out for the frequencies, you joined them, de-joined them, de-warheaded them, and behind the assembly building was a warhead building. And over to the left on the roadway was a generator building. And then as you go farther up, you had a repetitive area where you fuel, oxidize, and put some red fumic nitric acid in there. It was a very dangerous missile. And then farther up were the 3 magazines where the missiles were.
And so that would have been the launch area.
Yes.
And then that was the area that you worked in.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And our friend Ed worked in fire control.
Yeah, you might want to ask him for.
Right. We'll
Yeah.
cover that with Ed. So, what can you tell us about the security at these sites? What kind of security they had to ensure that it was protected?
Nike Ajax was not a high security site, and so you have one guard, and that was it. It was more like a fire guard. You had to make rounds and make sure everything was okay.
Did they have dogs?
No.
No dogs.
Nope.
And were there any security incidents when you were there?
Not really, because it was up in the middle of the forest.
So not much of a problem then
Yeah.
with the security issues.
And another thing you might throw in is the launching area was always roughly 2 miles away from the fire control area. And also, they were much higher. They always had to higher apart because of the radars.
I was just going to ask, can you tell us about any of the changes that came along when you switched from Ajax to Hercules?
I'm sorry?
Is there any differences that came about when you guys switched from the Ajax missile to the Hercules missile?
There's a big difference between the Ajax and the Hercules missile. Very much so. The Hercules missile was much more safer, but much more security being what they were.
Yeah, so I guess the Hercules was a nuclear-equipped missile, correct?
They were nuclear, yes.
So what additional security came along with that?
We had a whole full-time security force. That was their job. Now, I think to answer that question better is when we phase out of Ajax and go into the nuke sites, Middletown, because it was quite different, very, very much so.
Right. And people who lived in the area may not have even known that there were nuclear-tipped or nuclear-armed missiles within.
Now you're over into the Hercules now, right?
No, that's just it. Yes, that's
Yeah.
one follow-up question. Yeah.
Of course not.
Yeah.
How about you didn't know that Portland was there?
Absolutely. Well, I knew Portland was there, but I didn't know. At that time, when it was actually operational, I actually went on a Boy Scout trip, I think, to the launch site, and they lifted the missiles up and so on. Might have been Cub Scouts, but I think it was Boy Scouts.
You didn't remember me?
Yeah, I didn't. Okay, well now here's some of the specific questions. And I know you've covered some of this, Bob. You're in your positions that you held. What were the principal duties that you had? I know you sort of explained that you kept control of various property and so on and so forth. Did that role change over the years?
Oh, sure. That's the beauty part of the military. It's always different. You have a chance to go forward. I went from ordnance parts specialist to a panel operator in the magazine in the Ajax. I went to assembly sergeant in the nuke, the Hercules system. I did maintenance. I did all extra type jobs. Everybody in the military does extra type jobs. And then that was basically, you had to know all these jobs. Like whenever we had a crew drill or something, I was the guy, not blowing smoke, but I was the best on the panel. The launcher control trailer, which was the central point for the launching area, where the section chiefs would report in ready for action, and then I would report to the BCO, which is the battery commander.
So tell me, what was a typical week like for you when you were working in the Nike program? And maybe generally.
I guess I have to say it was much different Ajax. If you're going to talk stuff like that, we got to get into the Hercules system. Because the Ajax was mainly maintenance. But let me tell you, when you fueled and oxidized and put red fume and nitric acid in it, in the Ajax, it was downright dangerous. You wore rubber suits, you wore a mask, and every 3 months we would have to go up to Westover and have our blood drawn to make sure that there was no cancers or anything available. And that was basically what we did in the Ajax. The section chiefs that had the missile pits, they were mainly maintenance too. Maintenance was the thing. Now, if you want to go to nuclear now, we can ask.
Yeah, this would be a good time just to tell us what you typically did when the Nike Hercules missile.
Okay.
Let's just give it a
Pause for 1
Yeah.
second. The plane's going over.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, we should probably hear that, but hang on
Okay.
a second. You want to,
That's Ajax now.
right. So that would be sort of a,
While we're on the topic, let's just go for it. So why don't you tell us the story?
Okay. I was with the Army. I started 1 June. The rest of the units, with the exception of a few maintenance people, the rest of the units came in I think it was 12 July. So I'm up, they got me in a rubber suit and everything, showing me how to fuel and oxidize and all that. And all of a sudden the wiring harness for the Ajax, as I said, that was a dangerous missile, started smoking. And I won't mention a name, but there was one other maintenance man from the Guard there. And there was about 6 of us on the trailer. Well, 4 disappeared. They went over the berms. They didn't want to even stay there. And I was just so naive. I didn't know what the heck was going on. And the Army sergeant reached in and just tore the whole wire and harness off.
wow.
Okay.
And that solved the problem. Thank
Yeah.
goodness.
It was scary.
Yeah, I bet. Now, while you were either with the Ajax or the Hercules, did you ever have to respond to an actual threat?
Sure. And let me back up on one thing. I should have said this, and I didn't think of it. The Nike Ajax was built and developed to shoot down an enemy aircraft. The nuclear Hercules system was built to take down a squadron of aircraft. Okay, now your question was?
Yeah. Did you ever have to respond to an actual threat?
Absolutely, absolutely. We were locked in a few times. One I can remember, and everybody here, well, you're kind of young. Everybody here can remember where they were when JFK got assassinated. We were locked in, and we had no idea. And we had the missiles up, and the radars were all locked on, and we were ready to go. Yeah.
Did you anticipate a specific threat because of that?
Pardon me?
Did you guys expect there was a particular threat? You said you were locked on, but was there any aircraft? Was there any...
No, because it was later they released us because they figured it was not a rusher thing. And also we were locked in also on the East Coast brownout. And yeah, that was determined not to be a Russian threat. You might not know this, but the Russian threat, the main target was in New England was where? New Haven Railroad. And if you stop and think about it, that carried everything all throughout New England. So anyways, yeah, we were there, but we were always on alert. Let me put it that way. Regardless if we got a call or not, we were always on alert. That was big time.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And
absolutely.
the Nike Hercules was 100% safer than the Ajax.
So you told us, Bob, about sort of how you saved the day with the wiring harness and the...
I didn't. I was there with them.
Were there other incidents that you can remember that were notable like that, other thing when things went sideways, sort of, that you guys had to react to?
No, not really. Because, you're super cautious. You didn't mess around. It was not like, your weapon got plugged up and it was because you didn't keep the proper maintenance on it.
So was the JFK assassination and the brownout, were those the two major incidents that happened while you guys were on duty that caused...
On the Ajax, yeah.
On the Ajax.
Yeah. And really the Nike Hercules too.
Okay. And so given the work schedule, how did it feel to be away from your family and friends during the holidays?
I tell you what, I couldn't keep a girlfriend. I don't know how the heck they kept a husband, or a wife rather. I don't know. It was tough. It was tough. I can tell you 2 times. One time I was down Daytona Beach. I had tickets for the Daytona 500. And being part of the firing crew, we had what they called SNAP, short notice annual practice. And you would get a call on a Thursday night. And you had to be down Fort Bliss Sunday. And we went out to the McGregor Range, the firing range, and we were evaluated. And if I can say this, our motto was, we were better than the Army. And all you gotta do is look at the scores.
So you guys did very well.
Absolutely.
And did
Not all the Ajax sites.
Right.
Not even all, well,
ones
we
that
won't
you
get
were
into
involved
that,
in.
yeah. Oh, I'm talking about Middletown now. Middletown and Cromwell.
Did you all, did you travel as a unit, or did everybody went their own way and you just met down in Fort Bliss?
As a unit. Well, I suppose I could have drove over, but that's a long haul.
Yeah, to Texas. Well,
And it happened again. And I had to come back.
did you have any visits or interactions with any of the neighbors in the area where the sites were located?
I think a couple times that we had, like a PAO set up a visit, but I don't remember, that was Ajax. I don't remember Hercules because that was highly classified. I would bet that people in Middletown had no idea what was there. They knew missiles were there, and same with East Windsor, of course.
So what was think back now, what was your best day on the job?
Oh, wow. You
The one that stands out in your mind?
I'm sorry. You have to remember anybody in the military. They remember the good days more than the bad days. But we had a lot of good days. We were, when you live together, you form a bond. And that's why I've been throwing missile parties at my house for years. And that's the kind of bond we had. So, and the bad days, I probably would say we had an inspection, Ed will tell you too. They called it a DCE, Defense Combat Evaluation. And it was 3 days plus, 24 hours a day. And man, try wearing a protective mask for a day and a half. It was tough. But inspections they were not just a normal inspection. I remember when I went to the reserves, they were just getting ready for an IG, and I saw the IG, and I said, wow, they're getting all nerved up on this. But anyways, the DCE was the toughest one. But you have to remember, we were always being inspected. Right. Whether it was warheading, assembly, running drills with the IFC area to shoot down bombers from Westover, which was a SAC base then. We were always doing something.
And we did okay on your DCEs?
We were better than the Army.
Yeah, perfect. Now I remember you told me that there was an officer who sort of oversaw the personnel side, I guess, of the Nike missile program, and who you were particularly
our hero,
particularly impressed with and admired.
Our hero, and Ed was more involved in it than I was, Colonel Agassi. He took care of everybody that wanted a job. Everybody. And he worked the deal. Every position on a Nike site in the state of the country was frozen. And Ed will tell you how he went to Denver. So he was our friend.
Wonderful. And you mentioned your annual get-together, and I had a comment on that I said, it's been over 50 years since the program ended, and I know that you had a gathering of your, former fellow missile men this year, and have had for every year. Anything
we had
about that?
My parties that I started when I first built the house, and I had a couple at my other house on Box Mountain Drive in Vernon, had 35, 40 people. Now, bear in mind, some people were all over the country too, like any other military outfit, and they couldn't come, etc., etc. But and it slowly dwindled down, and I had one a couple weeks ago, 8 people. But others are still in the state, but they're not. They're the age they don't travel.
Right.
So it's been a long time.
Well, this has been great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anything else that you would like to add about your time? Get on film here?
Probably is, but I'll remember after I get up.
Well, don't worry, I've got more questions, so once George takes the seat, I'll...
Okay.
All right. I'm good. You want to sit here?
Yeah, please.
We'll switch.
Yes, I'm Dave Pitlick. I'm the Public Affairs Officer for the Connecticut National Guard. Can you take us through what a normal day was like for you? I know you took on a few different jobs, but just like in general, give us a sense of what it was like to start your day and go throughout your day working in the Nike missile program.
Okay, now we're going to stay with the nuke, the Hercules now.
You said
we're going to stay with the Hercules system now. We're not, okay. Normal day was always predicated on what maintenance options had to be performed. Whether it was, checking the booster stops and the warheads and stuff like that, or in the assembly building if you were a part of that crew, testing the guidance sections of the Nike Hercules. Remember, Nike Hercules was much bigger than the Ajax. It had 4 boosters instead of 1, but much safer. And so every day, other than hot battery, and that maintenance went on there to a degree. You didn't take a missile apart at all. And crew drills, we ran crew drills. I can run you a crew drill right now. That's how many we ran. And let's not forget about short notice annual practice. And then every month we had what we called hot battery, where we were on for 24 hours and then off 24 hours for 1 week. And then if the unit that we were backing up had a problem, we were also called in for that. So it was never the same, except maintenance was the God.
Got it. So you guys were, it was 24/7 staff, right?
It was a high job mentality being involved in it too, because man, just think, you and your wife are going to go on vacation. All of a sudden, we get a call on a Thursday night. We got to be down Fort Bliss. What's the wife going to say?
The Army's ruined plenty of relationships, so so just help me understand, not necessarily for the camera, but were you guys on orders? Were you being paid as your military rank, or were you government technicians?
Okay, what that was like from day one, I should probably mention is, we went to a 3-month package in July on Ajax to learn the system down at Fort Bliss for 3 months. You were paid according to your military rank, and if there was any difference to be made up, you were paid for the state pay. However, after 7 or 8 years, we reverted to federal instead of state pay. But you always never lost money. And you were on orders, yes. And the same with, when we went to Hercules, we went on for 2 months down to Fort Bliss, more out in the range. And the same thing applied. And then when you went to military schools, you were on active duty too. You couldn't lose money, but I can remember I was a buck sergeant then, and I would walk, that's when you got paid once a month, and I would walk through the pay line, and here's the pay master paying give you my envelope. Here you are, Sergeant Miller, $250 and 1 penny, ha ha ha. It got tiresome after a while. I remember marching the troops down to Building 2, which was electrical building, and that's another story. And this guy started yelling and hollering at me in some language, because don't forget that was a free range, NATO free range, yelling at me. I had no idea what he's talking about. So we get into the classroom, and here comes this guy. I said, oh man, I'm in trouble now. And what it was you had foreign troops in the classes too. And they were from the Netherlands, which were connected with the German army. And what he was saying, don't I salute foreign officers? I didn't know what he was. And he's not supposed to be there because you were supposed to have to speak English, but there was a warrant officer there that helped them out. And you know how that runs. And the other part of it was, I'm not a great man on math. To this day, I probably haven't figured out how the hell you take a letter and substitute it for a number. And the first 9 weeks, they gave us a test right to start with to see where the class was weakest. I'm thinking trig, calculus. I said, whoa, what did I get into? Of course, when I got out in the field, I maxed everything. But yeah, anyways.
Okay.
Sometimes I ramble on.
That's actually good for our purposes. So I guess I still have some questions about this
Sure.
Ajax to Hercules conversion. Can you tell us what that conversion was like, what it meant for you guys, what changes that brought about for your day-to-day?
Well, you took the Ajax, we used Portland, because that's where we were, and you had to ship every piece of equipment out. And then you had to patch up any cracks in the walls or anything like that. You know how the military is. And you closed it up. And you transfer it over to Middletown if you're launcher, or Cromwell if you're the fire control. And I was up there maybe a year later. The kids demolished the place. So all that work for nothing. And then you took over to Herc, and that was when we went to the 2 months of what they call package training, and to learn how to take over the Herc site. And then you had to come back and be certified, and then the Army would move out. Well, at that time, I was doing all the logbooks for all the missiles, the launchers, the test equipment, all that, the 2408s and 2407s. And I would assume they still have it now. You had a calendar for the Julian dates. And one side was the regular calendar, and the other side was a leap year calendar. And this wise Mr. Tracy came in. He said, you know, Sergeant Miller, he said, you did a hell of a job, but you're off on one day. And I said, what do you mean, sir? He said, you used a leap year, and 64 is not a leap year. So I spent a lot of time that night redoing forms.
Was he on the wrong side of the table?
But anyways,
Yeah. So start to finish, how many years did you spend in the program?
how many years did I spend? 11. I was the last man standing June 1st. Actually, May 31st. Or I think there's 31 days in May.
And this started as an active duty program, and then the Guard kind of took it over, correct?
No, I was in the Guard. He was in Japan.
Got it. I guess my parting question for you is going to be, how did it feel when you found out the program was concluding?
I'm sorry?
How did you feel when you found out the Nike program was concluding and it was no longer going to be in Connecticut?
You want to know how we found out? We were going over to Friendly's for lunch over in East Windsor, the launching area I'm speaking of, and about 6 of us were in the car, and the radio was on when we found out we didn't have a job. That's how we found out.
Can you tell me more about that?
What else can I tell you?
Like somebody came over on the radio and said, hey, the Nike program's concluding? Or?
State of Connecticut is closing all missile sites.
Okay.
Kind of hard way to find out, isn't it? And we had a missile dejoin. Dejoin meaning the missile was dejoined from the boosters.
Wow.
That wasn't a happy day. That's probably the worst day, George.
Can you tell us about that?
About what dejoining?
Yeah, about like what it is and what that day was like.
Say that again?
Can you tell us what does it mean for a missile to dejoin, and can you tell us about what that day was like?
Oh, sure. You had a portable lift, and you went and you disconnected the booster, and then you hooked up the missile to the lift and picked it up just a little bit to jockey it out of the funnel that the boosters were in. And then you brought it into the assembly building and you took it apart, you checked out everything electrically and mechanically, and put it together again, checked it all out, took it back down to the magazine where, you know, it was up on a launcher up topside, and slid it back in and set up all the stops and everything and took it back downstairs. If you notice, it was much simpler than the Ajax with the fulminic acid and the red fulminic acid and the oxidizer and all that.
It sounds like nasty.
It's a whole different world. A warhead would be the same way. We would take the warhead out in the warhead building because Middletown and East Windsor were roughly the same configuration. Now, there was one big difference in East Windsor. The LCT, the launcher control trailer, was encased in a big cement, I don't know, 3 yards deep. And that's also, this mainly was used for DCE too, the Defense Combat Evaluation, you know, the mask when your beard is shown. So that's how we did it. That was the 3 big ones, and that's where the assembly crew got involved.
Is there anything?
Just a quick follow-up on the Hercules, and you're basically disassembling all of that. What happened to the warheads? Where were they shipped, and how were they shipped?
The missiles?
Yeah, the nuclear piece of them.
Well, you have containers for each thing. You have a round cylinder metal container for the missile. You have one for the boosters. Where they went, I can't tell you. I don't know. Now, I know this. Few of us were offered jobs to the Nike Hercules had an arm plug, okay? And that was part of the drill with the crypto codes and all that kind of stuff. And it was a two-man. And another thing about the Hercules, you had a full-time security force, and I think you were interested in dogs. We had dog handlers. General Scorazzato was a dog handler. And they were unique because if they had to take over a dog, the dogs were all trained to be afraid of a fire hose to start with. But if you had to become a dog handler, you had to sit there on the outside of the kennel and talk to the dog and try to be its friend. But the bottom line was, when you finally made the move to go inside with the dog, you had to go in backwards. Now that one, I got off track, so I'm not sure what your question was. Okay.
No, that's fine.
Oh, George's question rather.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think I'm good.
Yeah, I think we're good. Just for curiosity, what did you do after the Nike missile program?
Well, I transferred to the 76th Division headquarters over in West Hartford, and not blowing my horn, I got over there as an E6, and I was put into the G4 section, assistant sergeant major slot. And down the line, I got promoted to 7, promoted to 8, and then I went and became I was a AST at that time. And then I went to, I took recruiting school, reserve recruiter, and did exceptionally well there. And at one time, Ed was my boss. And I then got, at the end, the reserves, 76th Division was my boss. Then they switched over to the Army. And then it got ridiculous. And I said, I don't need this anymore. By that time, I knew everybody at the division. I got a job taking over the AG section, Adjutant General section. You know, but I don't know about who was going to see it. And then the G1 colonel came up to me and said, now I'm a sergeant major now. Recruit and retention, and G1 came up to me and he said, "You want to come over and work for me?" He said, "You might have to beep this, I don't know. You only have one asshole to worry about instead of all these people." So I said, "Yes, sir." So I went over there, and then the division, the T&E structure changed, and you had personnel warrant in it, you had a supply warrant, you had a maintenance warrant, and you had a food and service warrant. And so Army told me I could have W1. I took that, and I retired as a W4.
Okay. So you stayed in the military.
I had 13 promotions, never a demotion, and I'm quite proud of that. But you asked it, you got the whole thing.
That's perfect. Is there anything else that you want people to know about the network?
I think the people, if they knew what some of the stuff we've been telling you, knew what that was about and what a stressful job it was. And we probably had as many people leave as we had stay, but we have remained friends forever. It was that kind of a setup. It was quite different than normal reserve and guard, I think. And I've been in both for quite a while. I had 39 years before I retired.
Good.
I have 2 questions, and then you can just answer them to him so you're still with me.
Did I screw up too much?
Nope, you're good.
Okay.
First is, you talked a lot about how the Ajax was more dangerous than the Hercules.
Absolutely.
Could you kind of describe a little bit about the difference between the 2 missiles?
Sure.
And just talk to him.
Tell me about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I maintained before, or I said before, you had to dejoin the booster from the missile, You had to put on a flatbed trailer. You had to go into a revegetative area with the big banks all around it. You had water there. You had to be in a rubber suit with a mask on to breathe, and a lot of people would run out of air. Yeah, you always had a person on the ground waiting to come in, and like you had fuel and oxidizer. You had red fume and nitric acid, which was bad stuff. You don't want to breathe that, and it made us go to Westover every three months to be checked for cancer or anything like that.
So in the Hercules.
Whoa! And we also a funny one. We also had an E8 in the launching area. You all probably know him, but we won't say his name. He was a good guy, and he was afraid of needles. And we all would fight like heck not to be behind him, because he just couldn't help himself, and he would faint, and you'd have to hold him up. But anyways, that's what that is.
And then my second question is kind of going back to something Major Pitley had said. That very last day that you had the program up and running, you shut down the site. What was going through your head? What was going through your heart? Like, what were you feeling on that very last day?
You really want to know? I didn't want a job. I was single, and I would just take the severance pay and have the summer off, then worry about a job later. I knew I could get a job somewhere, and but it didn't work. The last day, Colonel Galassi cut the orders to send me over to the division, and I think to talk a little bit about what you're saying is when I had to go back there. I think I touched on that. With the 76th Division Support Battalion, which was assigned to the Nike base, because they knew I know all the switches and how to get around the place. And it was funny. It was sad, because usually when you went down to the missiles or the assembly building, your duty station, you had a bunch of people laughing and doing crazy things, and nobody there. You're on your own. So that was different.
Yeah. Have you been to any of the sites since they've been vandalized or like turned over?
Well, the one in East Windsor became. They knocked down the BOQ and the barracks, and they put a new building in there. And the division and the 2nd Brigade and the support battalion were there still. It's now government owned. Where the missile pits were, the big car auction there, they worked a deal with the government, and cars are parked on top of where the missiles were at one time. Middletown, I'm speaking only of the launching area now. Middletown, they filled the pits with different types of sand, is the only Army can do with contracts. And the 405th Medical Detachment were drilling down there for a while. They had knocked the barracks down already. And they put in a BOQ, shall we say, barracks into the bank, solar type goodies. And I think the fire department's taking it over now. Ajax it's hard for me to think of where I am now. Except I see the floor that I spend a lot of time polishing on. But that's what the rest, and Sonia, I have no idea.
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Maybe everything's already been said, huh? You'll be in the same spot that Bob was with General Gay.
Bob and I go way back.
Yeah.
And we just want you to act like you weren't here for any of his interview. So don't.
You know what? I got to turn up my hearing aid here. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, act like you didn't hear any of his interview. This is purely your interview.
They didn't
Right,
have
right.
area. We called the IFC people skirts. And we call them that because in the winter they would be, and one thing I didn't touch on, in the winter they'd be in the vans and we'd be out in the snow and the ice with the missiles. And I didn't check on one thing. Russian trawlers were out in the ocean, and we would have to command Cal once a month, all the missiles, with the frequency of the MTA sending commands to the missile. And if the trawler was out there, they called it ELENT, electronic, don't ask me the rest, I forget. It's probably still ELENT. And if the Russian trawler was out there, we didn't have to command call the missiles, we were happy. But I meant to bring that up,
And we called them pit rats.
yeah.
We had another name for them too, but I can't say that.
So, let me just ask you, as we did Bob, what was it like in Connecticut during the Cold War, and what motivated you to become part of the missile program?
Well, I had done 3 years of active duty in the Army, and I had an 8-year reserve obligation. So I was still on that. I had been out for a couple of years. And I had known Bob in Glastonbury, and he told me about the program. Now, after leaving the Army in 3 years, I never thought I'd be back in uniform. But I think I was working, a good humor man or whatever, and he told me about the program that the reserve, then God was taking over from the active duty Army. And I thought, well, maybe I'll give that a shot. So that's how I got involved in it.
So you joined the Connecticut Army National Guard. You joined the Connecticut Army National Guard.
Right,
And the same unit as Bob was in,
yes.
the AAA battalion?
No, oh no, when I joined, it was when they were taking over the missile site from the Army.
Okay.
So I joined that spring, and like Bob, I was the first one to work on the missile site while the regular Army was there. I was his counterpart in the fire control area. I was an ordnance supply specialist, but I went to work there to learn my job before the rest of the group came on board.
So you raise a good point. So the Army controlled the missile sites before the Connecticut Army National Guard?
That's right. They were running for a number of years on the site before the Guard got
Did they
involved.
build those sites?
I'm sorry?
Did they construct those sites, the Army? Or
I don't actually know. Maybe the Corps of Engineers. I'm not sure.
and what was your what position were you initially assigned to?
Well, I was the supply specialist, and all of us, as Bob in the other area, had to cross-train. We learned different jobs. In fact, first time we fired a missile, I was on the acquisition radar, and so I actually learned almost everything. The only job in the fire control area that I didn't know or didn't work at was the missile, the missile tracking operator.
Now I know Bob was in the launch side of the operation, but you were in fire control. Can you? And we were told by Bob that fire control was about 2 miles away from the launch site, separated. Can you describe what the fire control area was like?
Sure. We had, first of all, we were up high, we were up on the hill. We had an acquisition radar, which is that's the first radar that detected the incoming target. And then we had a target tracking radar, and then we had the missile tracking radar. And then we had the computer that tied it all together. And what we would do was, as an act radar operator, you'd be told, we were getting information about enemies coming in. You would find the target. You had to acquire the target. You had to find it. So you're searching until it showed up on your screen, and then you would lock on that. then you would transfer it over to the target tracking radar. Now, we were in one van. I was with the acquisition radar operator. The battery control officer sat next to me, and then you had a switchboard operator and you had a computer operator. And then in the other van, you had the target tracking radar, which had three people on it. You had the main operator in the center, and then you had one tracking the range, and you had another one tracking the speed, or the altitude rather. And then you had your missile tracking radar operator, and he's locking on the missile, and the computer tied it all together. When the target tracking radar is on the target, and that's sending commands to the computer, the missile tracking radar is sending commands to the computer, so they're tying the two together. And the actual MTR is giving steering commands to the missile, guiding it to the target. So, and every job was critical. And I remember when I was on the Yak, I'm thinking, if I mess up, the whole thing is, if I can't pick up that target and get it transferred over, the whole thing is a failure. I mean, so even a switchboard operator, every job was critical. And I did that during an actual shoot when we did our shoots in Texas. And I'm thinking, if I screw up, they lose communication. The battery control officer would lose communication with the launching area, and the whole thing is going to be a bust. So as I said, everybody had to know their job. I mean, just automatic. You had to do it automatically.
So that's pretty interesting, because I think when I think of missiles and so on, I think of these heat-seeking, they sort of do it on their own.
Right.
Just kind of follow.
No, this had to be guided there.
And you actually had to drive and point and aim the missile.
Pretty much, yeah.
So in this case, the threat was Soviet long-range bombers. So you would acquire that target, and you had to, your team had to guide the missile right to the bomber. If they screw
Absolutely.
up, the bomber gets through.
Now you see why the lit factor came in, where that Russian trawler was out there trying to get the gold.
Confuse things, scramble it. Interesting.
I'd just add something that we also had another item here. It was called the interrogator, friend or foe. Your planes have a transponder, all domestic and our military, and you actually had to send out a signal, and if you didn't get the response back, that was bogus. That was an enemy.
Was that always operational? That transponder, in other words, just in the normal week that you were there, you had people on the fire control center and so on. Were they active in monitoring, say, planes coming into Bradley Field or wherever?
No. Well, actually, as he said, we had periods where we were the main defense of the area, and then we were there for 24 hours, and we're doing constant checks. Like at least every 6 hours, you're going through drills. So we're just drilling constantly, and the other part of the question was.
Yeah, no. So when you were the hot battery.
When we were hot battery, yeah.
You were on.
You actually, see, we weren't the first people. We wouldn't be the first people to see an enemy go. We wouldn't know there was an enemy coming in, so we would have to be alerted to that. And because our first line of defense was the Air Force, right? And we were the last ditch. If they got by the Air Force, if they got through, then we had to stop them.
Who was it that would alert you that there was an incoming bomber or incoming enemy plane?
We never actually had an actual alert where we were ready to fire it on a plane. Now we were at times, and this is part of another question, like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we actually thought when we were called up when we knew what was going on, watching TV, and we were called up, we said, this is it. We're going to fire that missile. So then there were a couple other times, as he noted.
Right, and that, we did talk about a couple of other times, didn't mention the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was the most scary period of time for many of us. I'm sure even you guys who were on duty.
That's right. Yeah, we actually thought this is it. We're gonna be in action. Yep.
Yeah.
I was just saying, could you tell us more about the Cuban Missile Crisis and what that felt like for you?
Well, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was asking, Cuban Missile Crisis for you. Like, what were the thoughts that were going on?
When I left home, when I got that call, and I knew it was coming. In fact, I think we were ready for it. We knew we were going to be called up. And when I said goodbye, I thought that was it. And we, not just me being in action, but the country would be, we would be under attack. That's what we thought.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I remember it well.
Yeah.
We didn't. I don't think that we necessarily thought that Russia would back down.
No, we didn't. No, it didn't seem likely.
So, in the launch area, was there any particular security that you had in that area?
In the fire control area? Yeah, we didn't have dogs.
Right.
But we didn't have the missiles, which were the critical item. But we had guards on the gate 24 hours a day. And an interesting thing is we were being tested all the time. Once we went to Hercules, people would come in and try to gain access to the site. So we were constantly being watched, tested on that.
General on it or something like that, and folks too had a, they thought they could intimidate them.
Yeah. What happened when the change from Nike Ajax to Nike Hercules was implemented? Did you go to a new site at that point?
Yes. We actually before we went and took over the site, we had to do another 2 months of training down at Fort Bliss.
Okay.
We did that when we took over the Ajax site. We went away for 3 months to Fort Bliss, and then 2 months when we went over to the Herc. And we actually went from Portland to Cromwell.
Okay.
And then went from Cromwell to East Windsor. But once we went to Herc, then because we had much larger coverage area and much more capability, we didn't need as many sites. So all we had at that time was, we ended up with only 2 sites in Connecticut, in East Windsor and Ansonia.
Interesting. Yeah. And then you had the SNAP exercises where you were put on short notice and had to go, I think, to Bliss, down to Texas.
Yes.
And were those with were you actually firing missiles at targets and so on? What was that like?
They had targets we would fire at, were called RCATs, radio controlled aerial targets. They were just a small aircraft. And actually they decided that was too costly. So they went to a simulated target. It was just a spot that you had to go to. And we were, just to brag a little, we were very successful. We were told that, for a couple of years, for a period, we were the #1 site in the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
That says a lot for the Connecticut Army National Guard
Absolutely.
soldiers. Yeah, that's great. In the area that you were in, did you ever have to actually respond to a threat, an actual threat?
No, just like I say, during the Cuban Missile Crisis,
Yep.
the other times when we, but fortunately they didn't come over here.
Right. And what were some of the memorable incidents or events during the years that you were you know, working on the missile program and in the fire control area? Was there anything particularly that sticks out in your mind as being, other than the Cuban Missile Crisis, which would have been quite memorable?
Not offhand. I mean, it was an intense job, and we were a very close knit group, you know. And we had a lot of veterans, and we stayed together all those years, and we worked together, we played together. But as far as incidents, I can't recall any other than those.
Well, let me just ask you. You said it's a fairly intense job. Was it intense all the time? In other words, you were a full-time soldier, and your assignment was fire control, you know, in the trailer that controlled.
Yeah.
Was that something that you did every day, or was that just periodically and only when tested, that sort of thing?
Well, for a while, I was only on the radars for a couple of years. I started out as a supply specialist, but I was working also cross-training on the things and actually participating. That was the intense part. My job as a parts specialist wasn't intense at all. But then I went from there to supply. I became a supply sergeant. Then I went to school as Bob, then I became a radar. I went to school for 10 months at Fort Bliss, 68, 69, and as a radar mechanic. So I came back as a radar mechanic. Then I went back from there to supply, to battalion supply. So I wasn't always on the radar. But the intense part was actually when you were doing a firing out, that was intense. Because as I said, if you didn't do your job, one person doesn't do their job, the whole thing can fall apart.
What was, just to circle back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's certainly a time when everybody was alert and aware. Were you involved in the fire control side of the operation at that point?
I was a supply specialist, but as I said, I could have been called upon to operate the AC radar or the switchboard, or even go on the target tracking radar.
So any of those jobs were.
But that time, yeah. So there was intense in that respect. Well, not only doing the job, but thinking that this is it. We're going to be under attack.
Yeah. So you remember we asked Bob what the worst day on the job was. Well, that was certainly
that was the worst day.
That was the scariest day.
Yeah. Well, there was another worse day too. We had when we went down to fire down at Bliss. One of our guys on the fire control area, really nice guy, everybody liked this guy. He was killed. He got run over by a drunk coming out of the NCO club down there. And then we had a military funeral. That was really a bad day.
Yeah. And how did you feel when the program ended?
It was actually, I had mixed feelings. We had very short notice, and fortunately we had Colonel Agassi, and I was told at that point that I would go down and be a helicopter mechanic down in Groton or whatever, and I wasn't too crazy about that, moving down there, and Colonel Agassi called me and he said, hey Ed, you want to go to Colorado? And I said, whoa. And then he told me they had an opening out there with a guard in Denver. So I called my wife, we said, yep, let's do it. Next day I was on a plane out there for a job interview, and came back, and then Uncle moved me out there, and I spent 2 years out there.
So to follow up on your reference to Colonel Agassi, so I gathered from what Bob was saying that he really found positions for everyone.
Oh, he was amazing, yeah.
Their jobs because of the shutdown of the missile program.
He got people jobs all over the country. No one was without a job that wanted a job. I mean, some people left the program, but.
Now, were you guys fortunate enough to get Colonel Agassi to come to one of your annual get-togethers? No.
I guess he did such a good job that Washington wanted him.
Oh, uh-huh. Yep.
That's what I had heard, that he had gone to
Yeah,
Washington,
that's
yeah.
what we were told.
Wow. Well, Major?
I'll jump
you
in.
got a question?
I'll jump
Okay,
in.
perfect.
Possible.
Of course. How are we doing on battery and memory? Good. Good. So earlier you were talking about firing. Did we ever fire any missiles from a Connecticut site?
No, no. There, I heard there were a couple of missiles fired accidentally, but not in Connecticut.
Yeah, I believe, was it Guam somebody accidentally fired in Guam? Maybe?
They were, well, it was probably not the, I don't think it was an operator problem, but I think it was a mechanical error that caused missiles. Yeah.
Got it.
And one killed a couple people, I understand, yeah.
We talked a lot about it being an intense job and knowing that anytime you could be called upon. Can you tell us about the sense of purpose or responsibility you felt while working in the program?
Yeah, I think we're very proud of what we were doing, and we were good at it. We were great at it, and we knew that we could do the job if need be.
Perfect. Let's see here. So just for my own knowledge, I know you talked a lot about cross-training and you talked a lot about cross-training, but did anybody ever cross-train from one side of the operation to the other? Was there ever any time where you would cross-train on something that's happening down in the pits, or somebody from the pits would be working up?
Not that I recall, no, no. They were really two
But,
very distinct operations,
got it.
and you would need a lot of training to do that.
Okay. Tim, are you thinking of anything? I'm kind of spacing right now.
You mentioned your wife when you moved out to Colorado. Were you married when you were part of the missile program?
Yes, yeah.
If you could just answer or talk to him when, what was her feelings about your work schedule and how?
It was stressful for the wives, and
Could you just turn it?
oh, I'm sorry.
You're answering that.
It was stressful for the wives and the families, and but the way we worked, and the hours we worked, we couldn't really maintain friendships outside of the Nike site, which was fine. So as I said, we worked together, we played together. Most of our friends and people we socialized with were fellow Nike people. I was married 2 weeks before I went away for the 3 months. That was not fun for my wife.
I can imagine. So what were your feelings when the program was shutting down?
Well, as I said, I had mixed feelings because, I mean, we had done it for 11 years, and it was stressful. But I mean, my job at the time wasn't stressful. I was in supply, but I thought a change would be good. And then a chance to go somewhere else, and, I'd go to Denver and try something different. So I was a little bit happy about that.
Good. Anything else?
What did you do prior to joining the program? You said you were active duty for a few years. What did you do?
Yeah, I did. I was 3 years on active duty. I was started. Ironically, I was an ordnance supply specialist in the Army. That's what I had joined to be a mechanic, but ended up in ordnance and supply. But then I went over to Japan, and they'd made me an accounting specialist in the headquarters over there. And then when I got out, I did a few odd jobs. I was a good humor man. I worked on construction. But just before we went on the Nike side, I was working on line construction down in New Jersey, putting up these steel high tension lines. And I was making good money, so I took a cut in pay. But I thought it would be worthwhile. As it turned out, it was.
I do have a couple other questions that just came to me. So you talked about the camaraderie, and you talked about the friendship you built with the other Nike people. Can you tell us about some of those folks, the people that really stood out in the program for you?
As I said, we had so many people that came through the program. It was not a job that everyone could do. So people would come for a short while and they'd leave. I mean, there was a constant turnover. But the people who stayed were the ones, generally the ones who started, the ones we started with. And we were all veterans. I mean, for the most, some of them were much older than me. And we were a really close, tight-knit group. And what was the other?
No, I guess you'd also mentioned that colonel. So can you tell us who this colonel was and what his role was?
I'm sorry.
Colonel Agassi.
Yeah, could you tell me, like, who was the colonel that was in charge of everything and what was their role? And, you know, how did he help you guys out?
Well, Colonel Agassi was a personnel officer. And we had other high-ranking people, you know, from the AG on down. We had an air defense officer who was a bird colonel. And we of course, there's different headquarters. We're a Nike site, then you got a group that's above us, and then you had then you have higher, you know, then you go all the way to NORAD, you know, North America Air Defense Command, was out in Colorado. But, and inspections, you talk about inspections. I mean, we had numerous inspections, and they were real inspections. I mean, you know, CMMIs and OREs and DCEs and IG inspections, annual audit. I mean, we were just constantly being inspected, evaluated.
The wrong tool on a warhead and you failed.
Right. I think I'm good. Do you have anything else, Tim?
Why do you think, again, answering to him, why do you think this program was so important to the defense of America?
Well, as I said, if the Air Force couldn't...
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Just look at him and answer.
If the Air Force couldn't stop them once they got through, we were it. If it wasn't for us, many people would die. You know, Hartford and Connecticut was a very important site, industrial population and industrial. And you had Pratt & Whitney, and because he said the railroads, and you had even had a nuclear facility out in Bloomfield that people didn't even know about. So we were a very important target, and we were really high up on the list, and we knew that. So if we didn't stop them, that was it.
Right. So that actually brings me to a good follow-up question is, did you know what the Russian target sites were? Did you know what the Russians would probably be aiming for if they got through?
Well, in Connecticut there were a number of sites, but Hartford and Bridgeport were very important sites.
Is there anything else that you want to add or anything else that you want to tell us or people should know?
Well, I think Bob wanted me to tell a little story about was in the news recently about the timber rattler that bit the dogs. We had timber rattlers up there. We caught our first one when we first went on, the first couple of weeks we were there. And they're a beautiful snake, big, probably, 5 feet, very fat. And we caught one, and I don't know, I saw it, handled it, or played with it, but I don't know what happened to it. But then a little while later, and I'm sorry to say, I killed a big one that was in the road. We had a lot of fun with it, scaring people, but I'm sorry I did that. I would never do that today. And then another one, we were on a hot battery, we were on a hot status. When I was coming to work, I found one and somebody had run over a timber rattler, but they had crushed its head, but it ran over. Well, I thought I'd have some fun with it, so I took it up there, and we were all up in the vans, up in our equipment, and our commander was down in the VOQ. So I coiled it where he would be coming up to do the checks. I coiled it on the steps there, so he would be sure to see it. And then we all were up there watching, and he came out and he saw it. He ran and got the shotgun. We had shotguns for guys, and he was going to shoot it. And then he's looking at it, and he said something. Then he saw us up there, all giggling up there. So he wasn't happy with me.
That's a good
We had a
one.
lot of funny stories. I can tell you one about the Ajax. The boss was a launcher, warrant officer, and
Okay, so your West Point story.
Yeah. We were at SNAP. That's when we had to go on a Thursday and go out to Fort Bliss and then out to McGregor Range to the firing range to be evaluated. And we were all done, fire control people, launcher people, assembly people, we were all done Wednesday. And, you know, like I say, we were under a lot of pressure. And when you release, you go down to Juarez and release that pressure. And we got a call, no, we got to do a night firing because West Point is here. We got to dazzle West Point. So we weren't very happy, so we do the night firing. They're all in their whites. And then we got out of there and went down Juarez, and it's not a very clean place, dusty, dirty. And here's the West Point guys in their whites. And when they stood up, the back end was nothing but dirt.
Oh, dear.
That's my story.
Very good. And then, sorry, was there anything else? I know we were going to take the picture, and then, is there anything else we wanted to add?
Not really.